is a powerhouse. Not only does she own her own tech company that helps tech companies, but she also has a nonprofit called Radical. Well, first, the tech company that helps tech companies or produces for tech companies is Indigo Technology. And then she has a nonprofit called Radical Evolution. And I'm going to turn the floor over if she's here. I don't know if I
I'm
see her
here.
here, but I'm going to unspotlight myself so that I can bring her. There she is. Miss Tammy, how are you today?
I am fabulous. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me today.
You're so welcome. I'm so glad that you joined us today. And so we're starting with asking four major questions. And I'm not sure if you received those in your inbox or not, but the questions that we're asking all of our guests to come on and talk about today, first and foremost, I like to start with, tell me about Indigo Technology.
So Indigo was started January of 2016. It's a software development company that specializes in building other tech-enabled organizations or startups. So I have a background in enterprise level software and development, and wanted to bring, kind of help the tech ecosystem here in Tulsa. And so that was the impetus for starting Indigo back in 2016. So what we do is we work with founders who have no background in tech at all. They don't know even oftentimes what a website hardly is other than just using one. So we take them, we take their idea and we turn that into their minimally viable product or version 1 of the software, and launch them into the world. So we take an idea and we turn it into a company, and we do that in about 9 months or less. On average, we're launching about 5 companies a year. So that's about average. Sometimes a little more, sometimes less, but that's about average. So we've launched in the past 3 years about 15 different companies, and we're on pace to keep that up in 2020, even despite COVID. So there we go.
That's amazing. So tell me a little bit about what success means to you.
So success for me is a few things. When we talk about my team, there's about 12 of us on the team. And when I describe kind of who we are, many of you probably watched Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer throughout your life. And you remember when Rudolph lands on the island of misfit toys. And so that is kind of the best description of the bulk of my team, is the island of misfit toys. In other words, they're very talented, but they never really felt like they fit in corporate America because for a variety of different reasons, you can imagine all of the stereotypes of software developers and tech people. And so one of the successes is building a team where people are allowed to kind of reach their full potential. And so I think we work very, very hard at that and try to get people to be able to live their passion and be able to kind of thrive in the best environment that makes sense for them. And because of that, we're able to then enable other people's dreams to come true. So a lot of times our founders have been thinking about, they work in an industry, whether it's healthcare, oil and gas, education, doesn't matter what the background is, and they've seen a problem in their industry. They feel like they know how to solve it, they just don't know how. And so we're able to enable them through our efforts and talents to reach their dreams and push them into the world, and other people can then, they can hire more people and build build new companies, and just expand that space. So that's really my definition of success is, are we able to empower our own employees as well as enable the dreams of others to go out and create a tech economy here in northeastern Oklahoma.
That's amazing. That is awesome. So what motivates you?
Stubbornness, probably. You should talk to my husband.
That is a unique answer. That is the first time I think I've ever heard that, but that is a real reason why people do what they do. So what are some of your own struggles within business and career?
So I think it's, for us, for Indigo, if I was in Silicon Valley, if I was in Chicago or Austin, I could start us up, create a company and say that we're a startup accelerator. And I wouldn't have to define what that was. I wouldn't have to, I would kind of be one of many, and people would just know what that was. Well, here in Oklahoma, nobody knows what that is. So when we started Indigo, it was really more of an education. So the struggle was getting people aware that our type of service exists, A, and B, once they know it exists, having them really understand what it is that we offer. So branding and marketing and education, and that's really kind of been the hardest part of building a business in a market where there's a demand for our service, but people don't even know what to look for. Most people who have ideas, they either try to get somebody who is doing it on the side, and we call those garage developers. In other words, you think of it in your basement or in your garage, it's on the side. And so they try to get things done on the cheap by working with a friend of a friend of a friend who knows software development. And I'm not going to say that doesn't ever work, but it's not the most effective usually. And it's part of what gives this industry a bad name, because those types of individuals aren't necessarily, when you're building new software, you don't know what you don't know. And so you don't know what questions to ask, and you don't know what features might be necessary that you haven't thought about. And so that's where we solve those problems for you, and we make sure that you have the best chance of being successful, because we know what goes into building a startup from kind of top to bottom, and all of the things that as a founder you wouldn't necessarily understand coming in. So we help coach you through that.
That's amazing. So I'm going to go ahead, and I want to turn it over to another topic. Of course, before we do, what is your power word for 2020?
Oh my goodness. Persistence.
Persistent. Why persistence? What's important about that?
Well, given you, Crystal, out of all of us, kind of know what it is that we've been dealing with through the COVID-19 and all of that. And so it's really, for me, it's just constantly reminding myself that it's going, there's been challenges and struggles, but you just have to keep going. And that in the end, it will all be fine.
Can I ask a question? Just one quick question.
Yes.
How do we, if someone wanted to find you, how can we find you? What's your information?
So I can I'll definitely put it in the chat, but Indigo, INDIGO, Tulsa.com is our website.
Great.
And I'll just I'll post my information in the chat. But most people, when we're building software, like I said, we've built platforms that it takes us, almost a year to build. But most of the projects that we work on, In many cases, it only takes us a few months, like 2 or 3 months or 4 months or things like that. So from a cost perspective, it's pretty broadly ranged. And most people are surprised that we're able to do things as kind of cost effective as we are, because that's all we specialize in doing. We're not even though we build your custom software, we aren't building it from scratch. So
Yeah. I'm just asking because some people may not be in the chat. Like, do you have a Facebook page so they can go on Facebook?
we do. Indigo, yeah, Indigo Technology has a Facebook page, so you can connect on Facebook. Obviously on our website, indigotulsa.com. Yep.
All right. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you so much for the information.
And for all of the speakers today, so that that's clear, that information will be on our website, which will be posted later. So going forward, if you have any questions about any of the speakers or who they are, you can check out our website, WHOW-network.org/spring-bling, and that information will be there. I will also post that link in the comments so that you can follow. So without further ado, take the floor, Ms. Tammy, and tell us about starting a tech company.
So you want me to do my little prezo, huh? Okay.
Yes.
So let me share my screen. Oh, can you grant me screen sharing?
Oh, is that not? That should be a option.
It says
I'll make you a co-host that way.
Okay.
Yes. So now you should have.
Yes. I am there. And there we go. All right, well, guys, I'm going to go through this not crazy quick, but I know that we're all, we've got a lot of great speakers that we want to get to today as well. But here's kind of our sponsors for Radical. So Indigo Technology, Radical Evolution, as Crystal mentioned, is our nonprofit, and we work also closely with SCORE. And this is kind of what I'm going to talk about today. Is most people know that it's important to have an idea, but then they don't know kind of anything else beyond that. And so we're going to talk about entrepreneur characteristics, kind of what is an MVP, why is it important to create a business plan, what's important about building your first startup team, and some funding options. How do we even think about scaling before we even have a business started? So, and some resources that are available after that. So some of the 7 entrepreneur characteristics, it's really important for an entrepreneur to kind of really understand strengths and weaknesses. So what you're seeing on the right-hand side of the screen, items 1 through 7, you have to be self-motivated, of course, because you're the one that's going to be making your business a success. You have to really understand what it is that you're offering, what is your product or service. Of course, you have to be willing to take risks, but there's risks and there's cliffs, and you have to be able to know the difference. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Knowing how to network, meaning not being afraid to connect with people you've never met before. That's a really important skill set if you're going to start a business, because in the beginning, the primary salesperson is yourself. And so you may not be comfortable doing that. And that's important to know too. And you don't have to be the best salesperson to have a successful startup. And that's what teams are for. So obviously basic money management, the flexibility to adapt and adjust based on what your market looks like. And we've all seen that with how COVID-19 hit our entire world and how many of us had to adjust as necessary. And then knowing the market that you're going to be going into. So again, if you don't have these traits, it's important to know what makes the entrepreneur journey successful, and then augment those with the team that you build around you. What we do if you're going to have a tech-enabled organization, and many of you might think of Domino's Pizza as a pizza company, but it's not. It's actually a tech company now. And it's a tech company because if Domino's had not pivoted and created the tech that allows you to go online, order your pizza, see is it in the oven, all those different things, Domino's wouldn't be in business today. So that's an example of what most people would consider a product, which it is, but it's a tech-enabled business. So when you're a tech company, you have to define what is that first minimum viable product, or MVP. And that's important to know who's your customer, what is their problem, and does your product or service solve it? And the biggest challenge for new entrepreneurs is they try to solve all the problems, when in reality, you really only need to solve about 80% of them. Any new product or service into the market, if you can solve 80% of somebody's problem, then you're kind of already in the door. And so the other piece of that is knowing, it solves it. Have you done the research? And so how you figure out if you're solving that problem, or if there is a problem to be solved, there's a lot of different ways of establishing an MVP. And your first MVP might not be technical at all. So there's something called a concierge MVP. And that's where you perform all the functions that your software would do. You just do them manually. And it's really a personal approach that allows you to have a relationship with your users. So an example of this is we have a team that came out of ORU, out of their entrepreneur program. And during kind of COVID-19, this was their idea before COVID-19, but it really launched heavily in COVID-19, is you might be, let's say that you're building a swing set for your child in the backyard, and you realize that you're missing some screws, or you realize that you're missing a board. And so instead of you having to stop what you're doing and go to Home Depot or Lowe's, you just text this number and they go buy it for you and deliver it. That is an example of a concierge MVP, because there's really not a whole lot of tech around it. They're just doing it. And they were so successful at this that they get that company, and there's the purchaser is going to be building all that tech around it. So that's an example of a concierge. And it allows you to really know, is this going to work? How are people going to like it? And what are the challenges in delivering that product or service? So another is a piecemeal, which is where you might take, text messaging and add that to, a Squarespace page. You kind of cobble the different technologies together so that you simulate what that eventual MVP might look like, but you don't have to really code anything or build anything. You're just trying to see if the idea will work. The Wizard of Oz is where people think it's automated, but it's really not. You're the one actually pulling the levers behind the curtain. And that is, you might text, Grubhub did this and Groupon did this in the beginning. So people would go on to a website and build an order, but instead of there being any real technology, there was just a human back there receiving all of that stuff. And that human was the same one that was delivering the food, for example. So that is how Grubhub came to be, is the founder just decided to be a delivery service to see if that would even work. But the customers didn't realize that. They thought it was all automated. And then the final one is the single featured MVP. And this is where you actually build the tech, but it's very narrowly focused so that you know exactly what it is that you're wanting to solve and how to solve that. Does anybody have any questions as I'm kind of going through this? Please feel free to just kind of interrupt me as I go. And then as you're going through these ideas, you want to know, are your potential customers, are they willing to pay for it? And how much and how often? So they do If it's a delivery service, then obviously they're going to pay each time. But if it's a subscription service, do they want to pay monthly? Do they want to pay a one-time fee per year? Things like that. So these are questions that we ask. If they're willing to pay, then how are you going to make money? Is it going to be a one-time purchase and they license it and they can own it forever? Is it transactional like Grubhub where every single time there's a fee on top of it? Or is it a subscription? Who's your competition? What makes you better? If the market is already saturated, that's going to be an additional challenge for you. Like if I wanted to enter into, if I wanted to go up against Grubhub, that's a fairly saturated market. I would have to come up with something that really made me unique so that I could compete against that kind of competition. And then are investors interested in the future of the product? So if you know that you want to scale, then eventually you're going to get to a point where you're going to need outside money to get you to that next level. So have you started a relationship with people who might be willing to invest? And are they excited about the idea enough to be able to kind of keep track of you and potentially be that? Then you take all of that and you create your business plan. And I know many of you on the call are probably fairly familiar with this, but there's kind of a foundation to your business plan. You've got an executive summary, you've got to know your market, and you've got to know your financials. And then inside of that, obviously you need to be able to describe what your company is and the structure and organization and management team. If that's just you, that's fine, but you need to be able to define it. When you do your market analysis, you need to know what exactly is your service and product, and what is going to be the sales and marketing strategy around getting that out in the marketplace. And then, of course, what is your funding needs? So how much is it going to cost for you to get this off the ground and keep it going? And how you kind of decide that is through what we call a SWOT analysis, or strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So as you're building your business plan, you ask yourself kind of these questions. What do you do well? What separates you from your competition? What are you missing? What do you need to build on? What does your competition do better? Opportunities, are you in an underserved market? Or do you have few competitors or no competitors? Sometimes ideas are such that you're the first one to enter into a market, and at that point, that's a different kind of challenge. And then what are some threats? Is it emerging competitors? Is it a changing regulatory environment? We've seen a lot of this through COVID-19. Those regulatory requirements that if I was going in to start a new event space, for example, I might be really concerned about the kinds of restrictions that might be placed on my ability to have folks in my event center. That's something that 6 months ago, nobody was really thinking about. So as we evolve and as business change, those could be threats to your business plan. Any questions? I know in the virtual world, I can't see all of you as I'm talking, so I don't know. I don't know how we're going. Once you have kind of the business plan and you've evaluated as the founder or the startup dreamer behind it, you need to know kind of what is the team around you. And that doesn't mean that you have to start with all of these people, but in the back of your mind, as you start the company and you start gaining success, and we call that traction, you might have to augment your team to offset some of the things that either you don't like to do or you don't do well. And so the CEO is often considered the dreamer and is usually the leader, but believe it or not, in many tech-based startups, that's often not the founder. And the reason for that is because the founder is usually the person who comes up with the tech idea, and they know exactly kind of what that's going to involve and what it's going to look like, but sometimes they can't, and they know kind of where they want it to go, but they don't know how to get from point A to point B. They just know they want it to get there. And so oftentimes the chief product officer becomes that original founder because they're the visionary and they have a clear vision of what they want. And the CEO, they hire a CEO to become that kind of dreamer and that point person to get them from point A to point B. There's also the chief technical officer. In a tech startup, this is usually the software engineer. If the original founder is not tech savvy, then that first software developer or engineer becomes that CTO. The chief sales officer, if you're not very good at kind of hitting the streets and knocking on doors, then the CSO or chief sales officer is the hustler. And then the marketing, which is different, sales and marketing are different. So the chief marketing officer is the storyteller or the architect. So they craft the story that tells your potential consumer, how does this product solve your problem and how effective is it going to be at solving that problem? So that's the CMO. And then finally, the CFO or the money manager. So ensuring that our cash stays flowing. So as money starts coming in the door, how can we be strategic about how we spend that money to build the company over the next few months and years? And then the pitch deck. The pitch deck is usually for companies that are wanting to go after investment dollars. There's a different thing called a sales deck that you're going to define and build that sells the product. But the pitch deck has a few key components. So you have to be able to introduce yourself as a company and tell people who you are and why you're here. You have to identify the problem and present that clearly so that investors can really understand what you do, why you do it, how you do it, who your market is, so that's your market size, and then a little demo of the product. And sometimes that's just going to be screenshots because you may at that point in time not have a live product yet. How are you going to gain traction? So how are you going to get into your market? How are you going to get customers and keep customers? Who is your team? So is that you as the founder and maybe you partner with a software organization like Indigo? Or is it you as a founder and you've started gathering your own resources within your organization? Who is your competition? And what are your financials? Have you thought about how you're going to sell that company? How are people going to pay for it? Are they going to be subscription based? Are they going to be transaction based? And then when you get the funding, what are you going to use it for? And how are you going to be strategic about leveraging that money over time? Are there any questions about that? It's a lot of information in a short little slide. No? All right. And then kind of the last thing that most people are concerned about when starting a tech company is the funding. And the biggest, we all hear terms like venture capital or VCs. We hear about investors and angel investors. But the reality is when you first have the idea, you as an individual are going to have to figure out how to fund it. And that's what bootstrapping is. It's your savings account. Can you get a personal loan or line of credit? Can you, if you currently work for a company and you have a 401k, a lot of times companies will allow you to borrow against that 401k and then pay it back, basically pay yourself back over time. Those are all different ways that aren't very sexy and they're not very fun to talk about, but that's typically the way that a startup tech company gets off the ground. Sometimes there's community grants, like we're going to be talking to Kuma a little bit later, but TEDC Tulsa Economic Development Capital Group. They have community grants that that can be used for very specific kind of tech startups. Sometimes there's pitch competitions where you can win $2 or $3 or $4 or $5,000 for winning the pitch competition. And then there's crowdfunding like Kiva. Kiva is an organization that's here in Tulsa, and it's 0% interest loans. But how the money is raised is you go on to Kiva and you convince others to invest in your company so that you can have a loan, a 0% interest loan that's paid back over 3 years. So that's a crowdfunding. But then there's economic development organizations, government grants, sometimes startup accelerators have funds, and then of course angel funds, but those are much, much harder to get a hold of. And then once we talk about scale, I wanted to shift it a little bit to think about traction, because traction is what leads to scale. So traction is the percent of the market that a startup can gain. And that means that if I'm a startup and I'm telling my story, like Indigo, if I say, I believe that our market is founders that have been in an industry, and so they know the industry really, really well. So they probably have 10 to 20 years of experience in their industry. They've seen a problem. They know how to solve it, but they don't have the technological background to be able to create that solution. So that's our target market. And I believe that we can identify at least 5 and up to 10 of those a year. So that's kind of my market. So if I can say, I think that we can get 10 of those a year, and if I hit 5 or 6, then that means that my traction is 50 to 60% of the market, of my market. And that's really successful. And that's a story that I can tell banks and investors to say, here's my market, and this is what I'm going after on a year-over-year basis. And I'm able to get 50% of that. That's much better than saying there are thousands of entrepreneurs in Oklahoma, and we just have to figure out who they are, but I'm doing about 5 to 6 companies a year. It sounds a lot better when I can say I'm getting 50% or 60% of my market versus we just work on 5 or 6 companies a year, if that makes sense. So defining your market is really important to say, so that you can prove traction, and then you can focus your marketing and sales efforts on that market. You can really establish relationships with your customers because you really have defined who that customer is. And then you can leverage that to gain investment opportunities in the future. And some of the resources that kind of help you do that, of course, shameless plug here for Indigo Technology, but also Radical Evolution is a startup resource center. I founded Radical Evolution because we had launched so many companies and they needed so many resources that they weren't finding. So that's what we're offering there. SCORE, excuse me, which is a small business mentors program that's here in Tulsa. And Crystal's a part of that as well. The Founder Institute, which is an accelerator program that we're bringing to the Tulsa market. And it's really an educational program of how to be a good founder. 36 Degrees North, a co-working facility that we work really closely with. There's several now. There's 36 Degrees, of course, which is the largest, but there's also the Root downtown. And then Women Helping Other Women, obviously a great resource for any women-owned business. And then we work really closely with another organization called Startup Grind, which is a network. It's a way for entrepreneurs, people who think they might want to be an entrepreneur, to learn what the entrepreneurial journey is and network with each other. and kind of help each other out. So it's a great local resource.
Ms. Torkleson,
Yes.
quick question. Can you probably explained this already, but the pre-seed, you said Indigo Technology is pre-seed accelerator, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
So can you explain that a little bit more? Like the pre-seed accelerator, is that just something that it accelerates the other businesses maybe, or?
A pre-seed accelerator is when you think about the entrepreneur, we hear things like seed stage and pre-seed. When you're thinking about a plant, you know, and when you have to plant that seed into the ground. So we're before we work with founders before they even have anything. So that's where that pre-seed comes from.
Okay, so awesome.
Yeah, we take them from I have nothing and I know nothing to where they actually have an MVP. And then we actually work with other accelerator programs like Founder Institute. And some of you may have heard of Stitch Crew, which is an accelerator program in Oklahoma City that's funded in part by the Thunder and the Lobeck Taylor Family Foundation. So we get you off the ground to where you have something. And then we can put that seed, you're at seed stage at that point, we can pass you off to someone who can take you to the next level. And that's kind of how that works.
That is awesome. So it's starting the baby and helping it grow. Got it.
That is exactly right.
Thank you.
Sure. And I think that's it. And I will share, Crystal has this deck and can share with the rest of you guys, but these are a lot of the